History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to this 539th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're heading over to Scotland. Our friend Robert Kruse suggested this one to us. It's the Drovers Inn.
Looking forward to it.
And I wasn't sure. What is the name Drovers about? Well, apparently it would be kind of the way that we would say drivers, like cattle drivers.
Oh, interesting.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of that in Scotland as well. This is an old place. It's been around for 300 years. It has been updated. I hear the food is amazing. Spooky Eats has been there and reported on it in her blog. They've kept to a lot of the tradition inside. When you look, it's of course been updated and more modernized, but it has like the tartan flooring. It just feels like Scotland for sure.
Very cool.
The pub looks like you're kind of walking back in time. Very neat. Definitely a place to check out in Scotland. It's got lots of ghost stories connected to it.
Excellent.
And there's not a whole lot of information when it comes to the Drovers Inn, so we're going to fill out the back end of the show. We got an email from one of our listeners, Kelly, that's 4 pages long.
I love it.
So we're going to
awesome.
share that at the end from our listener, Michelle. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the spectacular crew, Nicole, Kirsten, Anthony, Zena, and Kate.
Thank you for joining the Spooktacular crew.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
The moment in Oddity was suggested by Michael Rogers. In Finjia, China, one can find the deepest sinkhole known to man. It is known as Xiaozhai Tiaking, or Xiaozhai Heavenly Pit. Its depth ranges from 1,677 to 2,172 feet deep, while its width measures approximately 1,762 feet. During the rainy season, a beautiful waterfall can be found at the mouth of the sinkhole. The sinkhole was formed when the roof of a subterranean river gave way into the native limestone. The underground river that created this magnificent formation still flows today. After being mapped by British explorers in 1994, it was determined that the underground river spans a distance of about 5.2 miles. Species of flora and fauna number in the 1,285 range and include the ginkgo plant and even rare animals like the cloud leopard and Chinese giant salamander, the latter being one of the largest amphibians in the world, having the capability of growing up to 6 feet in length. Exploration of the area may be a bit tiring for some, but the views are said to be incredible and worth the effort. A majestic, mesmerizing sinkhole of such magnitude certainly is odd.
I'm Scottish, you know. Belong to the Mac Baz clan. Now where are my bagpipes?
And now, this month in history.
In the month of May on the 18th in 1897, Frank Capra was born. He was an Italian-born American film director, producer, and screenwriter who had many major award-winning films to his credit. He was raised in Los Angeles from a young age and was the only one of his 7 siblings to attend college. Although he had that education, Capra was unable to hold a steady job. For a few years, he resided in flop houses, hopped freight trains, and supported himself with odd jobs on farms, performing as a movie extra and selling oil well stocks. He once said that he, quote, hated being a peasant, being a scrounging new kid trapped in the Sicilian ghetto of Los Angeles, All I had was cockiness, and let me tell you, that gets you a long way. And indeed it did. When he was 25, Capra read a news article about a new movie studio that was opening in San Francisco. He phoned the studio and insinuated that he had experience in the film industry, although his only experience had been while in high school. The founder of the studio, Walter Montague, was still impressed by Capra and paid him $75 to direct a one-reel silent film based on a Rudyard Kipling poem. After that experience, Capra concentrated his efforts on obtaining additional jobs in the film industry. He was hired to be a gag writer for Hal Roach's Our Gang Little Rascals series, and he continued developing his film industry skills. In 1928, Capra initiated his connection with Columbia Pictures and Henry Cohn in what would become a long-term alliance. At the time, Columbia Studios was considered a poverty row studio, while up against companies like MGM, Paramount, and Warner Brothers. In the 1930s, Capra began the climb to establish himself as a #1 Hollywood director. Capra's films like It's a Wonderful Life, You Can't Take It With You, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington solidified his arrival in a true rags-to-riches style of the American dream personified.
The Drovers Inn has stood for over 300 years and is one of Scotland's oldest and most haunted pubs. This establishment was named for the Highland drovers, which were cattle drivers. Over the years, thousands of people have stayed here. Some have experienced paranormal activity, and there seems to be many stories connected to this location and to the drovers themselves that involve death. And this, of course, leads to ghost stories. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of the Drovers Inn.
Loch Lomond is a freshwater loch in Scotland that crosses the Highland boundary fault. Many people think of this as the boundary between the lowlands of central Scotland and the Highlands. Loch Lomond started back with the Ice Age. 3 or 4 lochs merged into this body of water. People first settled the area around 5,000 years ago, and they left behind some evidence of their dwellings. The Romans invaded in the 1st century AD, and they built a Glenblocker fort at Drumcastle. And that is spelled Drumquhassle. I would have never pronounced it that way.
Oh my, okay.
Glenblocker forts are located at the exit of a glen. During the early Middle Ages, this area was part of the kingdom of Strathclyde. During the early medieval period, Viking raiders sailed up Loch Long and sacked several islands in the loch. Eventually, this became part of the province of Lennox and was called Loch Lennox. The name was later changed to Loch Lomond, which is probably from the Gaelic word Limhan, meaning Lake of Elms. Folk hero Rob Roy hid out here at times, and whiskey smugglers had a major smuggling route through the area. Loch Lomond is popular with tourists. At the northern tip of Loch Lomond, the Drovers Inn was built. And this place is really, really beautiful. It's got all kinds of hiking trails, and there's lots of the lochs to look at, and lots of wildlife, so people like to go up here and just get in tune with nature.
Nice. The Drovers Inn was established in 1705, but more than likely was a military installation before becoming the inn. Diane saw on a map of the same location that it was probably named Alt Arnon Inn. The inn was later named Drovers Inn for the Highland drovers. Highland soils proved to be better for raising cattle rather than growing crops, and so cattle droving became a vital part of the Scottish economy and remained as such for 300 years. Cattle were an important food source and could even be bled a bit without killing them to get blood to mix with oatmeal to make an early version of black pudding. Yum?
Ooh, yummy. Can we have some of that tonight?
Don't knock it till you try it. Just as they ran cattle drives in the west of America, Scotland would do the same thing to bring cattle to market, traveling long distances. The drovers would gather around the fires and share stories in the evenings, and many of these stories included folk tales, stories about cows and horses, and fairy tales. These early cattle were called black cattle, and they were descendant from Celtic oxen, and were a smaller version of the more modern-day Highland cows, and they were very hardy. They had long horns and thick hides with long hair that was well suited to the harsh winters. When Scotland was still set up as clans, it was expected of a young up-and-coming chief that he would make a raid on the cattle of another clan as proof of his manhood. Fun fact, blackmail became a word at this time because mail meant rent, and tagging it onto black referred to paying a tribute to get protection for the cattle. The black referred to the black color of the cattle.
I had no idea that went back to paying for protection for your cattle.
Yeah. Droving eventually went away as a way of life when the railroad made transporting cattle easier. Many of those Scotsmen immigrated to America and became cattle ranchers in Texas.
I just love that history. I had no idea about any of that. And this idea about a chieftain of a clan going after the cattle of other clans was a normal thing, and it was kind of okay. Like, you didn't get in trouble for it. So if there were cattle that were kind of wandering around, hey, they're easy prey. Just go ahead and take them, and they're all yours.
Just part of life.
This was something that was a constant battle there, is protecting your cattle and keeping them safe and going after other people's.
Interesting.
The Drovers Inn originally catered to the drovers, and one of those men was the infamous outlaw Rob Roy. Many people refer to him as Scotland's Robin Hood. Rob was born as a MacGregor and later took on the nickname Rob Roy, meaning Red Rob, for his dark red hair. His uncle was the chief of the clan MacGregor. Rob spent his early years cattle stealing. As you see, that's the thing to
Right.
do back then, and blackmailing. And when the penal laws against his clan of MacGregor were reinstituted, he took on his mother's name of Campbell in 1693. Rob was eventually entangled in debt and ruined by 1712. He then started a life of highway robbery, particularly during the Jacobite Rebellion of 1715. He was arrested in the early 1720s and confined to Newgate Prison in London. Rob Roy was pardoned in 1727 and died in 1734 at the age of 63. It'd be pretty cool to say, hey, I'm staying at an inn that Rob Roy used to hang out at.
Yeah. The Drovers Inn faces the road from Crianlarich to the head of Loch Lomond and stands 3 stories tall. There's a central gabled dormer and central pitched roof front porch with a window that had been a door when the inn first opened. The exterior was made from rubble stone and the roof was graded slate. A large wing to the right was added in the late 19th century. The left has a single-story addition. There are small stacks to the north and south gables and a near-central ridge stack. The interior has been renovated extensively, but some original parts still exist. The ceilings are low and the windows have shutters. The interior is quirky and has been decorated with many taxidermy animals, including a bear that greets people upon entering.
And believe me, this bear, the pictures that I've seen, is a little worse for the wear.
Oh, is he getting a little bald?
Well, it's not so much bald as he just, he's got like the central
Stitching?
stitching in the middle, I guess, that you can really see. And yeah, he's definitely been around for a while.
The bar still serves up drinks and the kitchen provides gourmet meals. A metal shark hangs from the ceiling of the breakfast room.
I'm not sure why there would be a metal shark there, but there
You
is.
did describe it as quirky.
Yes.
In 2004, Ernest Strang bought the establishment. He sold to the Bruce Group Scotland in 2022 for more than £3 million. The Drovers Inn today has 15 rooms filled with antiques, oil paintings, and modern amenities. There's also the Drovers Lodge across the road that has 16 modern chalet-style rooms, and the Old Stagger Inn has 3 double rooms.
This is said to be one of the most haunted inns in Scotland. There are many stories connected to the unexplained phenomenon. The first dates to 1792, which was known as the Year of the Sheep. The owner of the land where a certain crofting family was living decided that it would be more profitable to use the land for sheep farming, and he forcibly removed the family. A croft is an area of land used for agriculture, so the family was farming the land with crops. So basically, a crofting family is a farming family. The couple had a young child, and they decided to head to the Scottish lowlands, and if that didn't work out, they would immigrate to another country. It was a bad time of year to be traveling as it was winter and they were caught in a heavy snowstorm. They decided to make their way to the Drovers Inn, but the visibility became poor and the family was soon lost, and they froze to death. There have been many people who claim to have seen the family wandering near the inn, and sometimes even inside the inn, as though they have finally reached their destination in the afterlife. One couple staying in room 2 were awakened from their sleep because the room had turned freezing cold. As they peered towards the end of the bed, they saw a young family of 4 standing there, shivering. They could even see their breath in the icy chill of the room. The young boy of the family waved at the couple, and then the family disappeared.
The ghost of a cattle drover named Angus is said to be at the inn. Nearly 300 years ago, he was driving a herd of cattle to a highland chieftain. He decided to overnight at the drover's inn and let the cattle rest. Angus decided that he too would rest, but not before he imbibed in several of the ales the inn had. A rival clan was at the inn, and they saw that Angus was very inebriated. Angus passed out and awoke late the next morning. He was upset that he hadn't gotten an early start, but he was even more upset when he saw that the cattle he was driving were gone. The rival clan had stolen them. Angus had no choice but to continue on to the highland chieftain and tell him what happened. The chieftain was enraged, and he punished Angus by killing his family and his sweetheart. Angus was then banished from the clan. He roamed the highlands for months and came upon the rival clan and decided to get revenge. Angus hid himself and prepared to ambush the clan, but he had been spied earlier by one of its members, and the group actually ambushed Angus. It was night, and they hanged him from a tree behind the drover's inn and bled him out. Many guests have claimed to hear the disembodied screams of Angus and to see his apparition wandering outside the inn, perhaps still seeking revenge.
I've also heard the story told that Angus was taking that clan's cattle to the market, and then he lost them and had to go back and tell them that. I don't know that any of the story is true at all. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, if you're driving cattle, wouldn't you have more than one person taking them to market? I would think you'd have several members of the clan going, especially knowing that this is the kind of stuff that goes on there.
I would imagine.
You're probably going to have people try to take them, so that would just be crazy to me.
I mean, unless it was just a smaller number of head of cattle.
Yeah, I guess. But even if you had like 10, I'd still would want to have somebody else. The River Fellock runs behind the Drover's Inn. Many years ago, a young girl was playing with her doll named Annabelle, of course. In the water. Usually the river was fairly tame and shallow, but there'd been a lot of rainfall the day before, and the undercurrent of the river was very strong. The child lost her footing and slipped beneath the water and was swept downriver. By the time anyone noticed that she was missing, it was too late. A search party of family and cattle drovers found her lifeless body and carried it to the Drover's Inn, and laid her on the bed of room 6. The family went off to prepare her burial. I heard that she was probably in the room for a couple days. Yikes. Because the girl had been placed in this room, it is thought her spirit is connected to room 6. Guests claim to be awoken at night when they feel a tiny, ice-cold body next to theirs. She's just trying to get warm. Come on.
Yeah.
Give a kid a break. And the doll Annabelle has popped up in different areas of the room as if seeking her owner.
Oh, goodness.
That would not be okay with me. I already don't like haunted dolls. If it's a ghost doll that's just popping up, no.
One couple staying in room 6 reported, on the night of Friday the 21st October, my girlfriend and I made a stop off at the Drovers on our way up to the Isle of Mull. I've stayed at the Drovers many times, but it was the first for my girlfriend. She loved the place, by the way. We stayed in room 6. After having a bite to eat in the bar, we retired to our room for the night. At some stage in the middle of the night, my girlfriend woke me up and asked if I could see the flickering lights moving around the room. Still half asleep, I told her she must be looking at the flashing light on the smoke detector. She asked me to look again, which I did. To my surprise, there were numerous tiny white points of light dancing around in midair. At any one time, I would estimate we could see between 10 and 20 of the lights.
That's so weird. I've never heard of that before. Other than there was that one video that caterer that was, I can't remember, it was somewhere in New England, I think, that they rented out that house or building or whatever, chalet, and they caught on their closed circuit TV. It almost looked like snow in the room.
Oh, yeah.
With all the orbs and stuff.
Yeah. Although very small, the white lights were very intense. They seemed to move randomly, appearing and then disappearing. The room was pitch black with no other light source which could have been reflecting to cause what we saw. We both watched the lights for a long time, unable to explain what was causing them. The best I could come up with was that they were some type of tiny firefly. This was discounted when I later asked the hotel staff if such creatures inhabited the area. The answer to this was no.
Which I would have kind of thought, well, maybe it is like fireflies somehow are in the room.
That's what went through my mind while I was reading it.
So now, of course, it has to be fairies, I'm sure.
Fae folk. A week and a half on, we still cannot give a rational explanation of what we witnessed. Currently, the only explanation we have is that we witnessed a number of orbs, often seen in photographs, and believed to be some kind of spiritual manifestation. I can't wait to return to 6. I'll bring a decent video camera next time.
And of course, it'll never happen again. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Another little girl ghost may be at the inn as well. A guest emailed the inn about this spirit, and the inn shares it on their website. A lady recently stayed at the Drovers one Thursday night with her daughter and friends for a birthday treat. A few days later, she emailed wondering if we could tell them who the little girl in the pink dress was in the photograph they'd taken on the stairs. She said she was not with their party, and they didn't recall seeing any children in the hotel that night. Her daughter, who took the photograph, swears the little girl was not there when she took the photo of the staircase with her mobile phone. They were totally spooked out by the photograph, but felt sure we'd be able to give them an explanation. Unfortunately not, though. There were no children staying at the hotel that evening, nor any children visiting. Spooky. No one knows who this little girl ghost might be. So they don't think that she's the little girl that, fell into the river.
The inn shared another experience from a couple who stayed in room 115. In the morning, while packing up to get on their way, they noticed that their digital camera had been moved slightly from where it was sitting next to the bed. While inspecting the camera, they found that there had been a number of photographs taken throughout the night.
What?
I know.
Better not be of them. I mean, those are the creepiest
Ew,
movies,
yeah.
when people wake up and they look at their camera and they're like, somebody took pictures of me while I was sleeping.
On looking through the photographs, they all appeared to be of the couple sound asleep, with what looked like an eerie light emanating from above the four-poster bed that they lay on.
Yikes.
Confused by this discovery, they at first thought it could have been the work of one of their traveling companions, trying to play a prank on the couple for retiring early the night before. However, this explanation was soon discarded when they realized that their room door was still locked from the inside, as they had left it the previous night. On checking out of the inn later on, the staff at reception also confirmed that there hadn't been any staff that could have had access to the room either. With the couple's friends also denying any knowledge of the incident, it remains a mystery to this day who or what took the photographs.
Paranormal investigators Paranormal Scotland captured eerie footage when they investigated in 2022. The group is headed by Michelle Walker, and they overnighted in rooms 2 and 6, which are apparently, as we've seen, the most haunted there. Michelle told the Daily Record, "When we first arrived, we had a good look around before we went up to haunted room 6 and set up a camera. We left this camera running while we went down to set up some cameras and equipment in room 2, which is also said to be haunted. Room 2 didn't get them any results, but in room 6, they captured several glowing balls moving in all different directions." It sounds like that's the main kind of haunting going on here. Michelle said, "We caught on camera some strange lights, what we believe to be orbs. I know a lot of people put this down to dust or insects, but there were no bugs in that room that night. And dust is just completely different under a camera. It's a lot more consistent. What we captured was just amazing to watch." The group also captured a weird picture of something white and translucent passing the bedroom door. When I looked at it, it kind of looked like it would be the size of a child, and almost like if you had a light and you were projecting a shadow onto the door. Only it was like a reverse shadow because it was at night. So it was like white.
Interesting.
So I don't know what that was.
The ashes of a former patron are kept in the pub. His name was George. There are some who say that George now haunts the bar.
I wish my brother George was here.
Goodness. The Drovers Inn invites people to come as strangers and leave as friends. Perhaps there are some spirits who just decided to stay. Period. Is the Drovers Inn haunted?
That is for you to decide. If for nothing else, this sounds like a really cool place to stay just because it is so old with all that history behind it.
That's actually why Robert suggested it. He plans if he ever gets across the pond, he's definitely staying there.
Neat. So now when people say, what's a place you want to investigate? We could be like, well, we always say a castle in Ireland or Scotland. Now we could be like, well, maybe that Drovers Inn too.
Definitely.
We'd love to have you guys check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. So as I said earlier, we got this email from Michelle, and she even entitled it, "My Life in the Bush of Ghosts." And the above is the title of a 1981 album by Brian Eno and David Byrne, and I recommend it to you. I stole their title for this note.
Alrighty.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and that's with one L. And I recently started listening to your delightful podcast. I'm enjoying it greatly. I felt the need to reach out and tell you of my experiences with the paranormal. I've had just a few. I do tend to prattle on, though, so I will try to be brief. And we don't mind. Prattle on, prattle on. We love to hear your stories. I think the reason I got into the podcast and that issues of the paranormal have been so much on my mind lately is because recently at age 65, I saw a full-on apparition for the first time, and I'm kind of thrilled about it.
Nice. So there's hope for us yet.
Yes, we still can have the Holy Grail, Kelly. And I'm like, we'd be pretty thrilled about it too. I will get to that, but before that, I've been interested in ghosts ever since I read The Children of Green Know by L.M. Boston when I was 7. Ever since then, I've been very enthused about ancient English manor houses, though I am American and live in Southeast Michigan, and ghosts who aren't too scary. I'm not someone who enjoys horror movies or such things. I did have one hair-raising experience when I was about 20, which I would like to describe, since I've been thinking about it ever since and do not fully understand what happened. I was talking with my husband about it last night. He was present and went through this just as I did, remembers it just as I do, and can't really explain it either, but here goes. We were sophomores at Michigan State University, which means they've been together a long time. That's a long time to put up with somebody. That's what I always tell my parents when it's their anniversary. He had a room in a tatty little apartment building, and I spent most of my time there with him rather than in the crowded dorm. We were already by then a devoted campus couple. So this apartment building had 3 floors, a central hallway down the middle of each, with 3 rooms on either side, so 6 to a floor. He and I occupied a studio in the middle floor, middle room. There was a long, narrow room, kitchen at one end, and a curtained-off bedroom space at the other with a bathroom and living room between. The bedroom was merely curtained off from the living space, a mattress on the floor with one of those old Indian muslin bedspreads in Technicolor from the 70s that had, I believe, people in various positions of the Kama Sutra on it.
Okay.
70s tacky it was. Anyway, there were some weird people upstairs. I don't know who they were. I had for some reason the impression that they were Orthodox Jewish people because they wore long black coats. They're the men in black. Now, I don't think they were, but I don't have any idea what their deal was. I only rarely saw them, but we heard a lot from them. They lived above us, and they would have big gatherings of people up there, and there would be the sounds of stomping and chanting. Seemed like most weekends they had gatherings. It was curious, but we went about our business until one night. If people are chanting above you, get out! Next thing you know, they're coming down to sacrifice you. One night, he and I were sleeping on that mattress on the floor facing each other. Separately, but at the same time, as we later verified with each other, we began to hear in our dreams the now familiar chanting and stomping. Only this time the chanting got louder and louder and louder and louder until it stopped abruptly, and we both woke up, gasping and looking wide-eyed at each other. There was, we could feel it, something on the other side of the curtain, and it was something terrible. There was utter silence. We held each other, and I strained my senses to see, to hear, anything to account for what we were feeling. I wasn't sure if I heard the door burst open or not. My husband said later he thought it fell through the floor.
Oh.
I thought I could hear the breathing of some large animal out of breath or angry, and I could see the curtains moving in and out from those breaths. There was a feeling of overwhelming terror. Oh my God, I would be totally terrified too. I held my beloved and imagined a bubble around us in which we would stay safe. I announced to the room without speaking that we had summoned no one and wanted no contact with any being who was summoned. I explained that I was a Christian, a United Methodist baptized and confirmed, and I held no business with demons or any other spirits. I recited in my mind the Lord's Prayer and the 23rd Psalm. You know, another really good Psalm, 91. If you guys are scared and you feel like you want protection, Psalm 91. A lot of people will read that every night before they go to bed. Gradually, the terrorized feeling faded. I felt that the whatever the hell it was faded away. Not because of anything I did or didn't do, he just faded. I didn't sleep, just lay there thinking and still scared. Did our door really get blown open? I was too scared to get up and check. Until I heard the paper boy come into the building and the papers thumped against our doors. He threw it down and I went to sleep. So then they knew the door wasn't actually open. I never figured out who the people were upstairs, and I never really understood what they thought they were doing, but there's no real doubt in either of our minds that they summoned a demon that night. We never told anyone else about it because, to describe it, it doesn't sound like much. We woke up at the same time because our neighbors upstairs were chanting and we got scared. Sounds lame, right? Until just now, I'm telling you, true story. I have no idea what it was about other than I had to laugh when I heard you debating about aggravating the spirits. One of our little sayings to this day is, don't summon it up if you can't put it down.
Oh, gosh.
Now, that is
that.
a t-shirt, man. That is a t-shirt. Don't summon it up
Definitely.
if you can't put it down. So that was when we were about 20. I collected stories from others about ghosts because, as I said, I am more interested in benign ghosts than I am in anything evil. I won't tell other people's stories, with one exception. I may append a story that my mother and aunt told me at my grandmother's wake. I think they were telling the truth, but they are too senile now to reassure me. Anyway, it takes place during World War II, might make a nice Christmas story, and I will append it. So other than collecting stories, I have nothing much until recently. I've been able to travel in my 50s and 60s, for which I'm grateful, and have been to 2 places notably that I felt to be haunted. One was the gardens of the Petit Trianon in Versailles, and I had read about the haunting or the time slip there. It felt like a time slip. We were there on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and few people were in the back 40 there with us. It was very, very atmospheric, and the hairs were standing up on the back of my neck. There was a great deal going on just beyond the edge of our vision, I felt, as we wandered around in the gardens of the Petit Trianon. The other place I didn't know was haunted. It was the last stop of a wonderful Irish tour. You got to go to Ireland. It's magic. A place called Cabra Castle. I walked around the castle, and it felt quite normal. When we went to our room, it was off a courtyard that had been a stable yard. They had a garden with statues in the stable yard, and it was creepy as all get out, and that was at noontime. I mean, every hair stood to attention on my head the whole time I was in that room or in that stable courtyard. I was glad to leave that place, though I loved Ireland and badly want to go back. When I got home, I read about the ugly goings-on in that courtyard. Consider doing a piece on Cabra Castle near Dublin sometime. I won't go into it here, but you can find it. So I don't know what the heck happened in that courtyard. Did they hang some people or something? So the main reason I'm writing you, I got to share this with someone besides my husband who believes me but is entirely too metaphysical about it all. I was in England last December on a London tour. Didn't enjoy it much. I was travel sick. It was very gray and rainy. But the last 2 days after the tour, we went down to Westerham, which is south of London in the county of Kent, in a beautiful area called the Kentish Weald. We went to Ightham Moat, and thank you for giving me the pronunciation help, which is a medieval moated hall that I do not believe is haunted. I was thrilled because, as I said, I love old English manor houses, and this is a lovely little place. Then we went to Chartwell, which is Winston Churchill's home from the 1920s till his death. I've read a great deal about Winston Churchill. He's always been a fascination of mine, and I was so excited to be able to go there, even if, being Christmas, the whole house was not open, just selected areas. I had a pretty good idea where everything was, the layout of the place. As we walked south toward the raised gardens and the house, I looked to the left and saw the beautiful valley and the lake he'd had dug there. Did a lot of the digging himself, and many of the brick walls were built by him as well, as he had become a master bricklayer after he bought this house in the early 20s, a little over 100 years ago.
That's so cool.
I would have never pictured Winston Churchill as a bricklayer. We were walking up toward the gardens and the house when I felt a little ping in my brain, as if someone had said, without talking, look over here. I looked to my right, which is where this ping came from, and I saw Winston Churchill sitting in a white wooden chair at the edge of what I realized was the goldfish pond.
Oh my word. I love that.
I just happened to see him over there. And this isn't back in the 40s. I immediately realized that I had completely misunderstood where the goldfish ponds were. I thought they were down by the lake. But here they are, and here's this big white wooden chair he used to sit in just here while he painted the goldfish ponds, which he painted more than any other subject. Churchill took up painting almost exclusively oil painting after he moved to Chartwell in his 50s and became a devoted and skilled painter. So he was definitely sitting there in that wide white wooden chair in a black suit, elbow on the arms of the chair, hands clasped, leaning forward and looking directly at me. His face was so vivid and real, his body a little less so. He was smiling and his eyes were sparkling and snapping, and he looked full of mischief like a naughty boy. I don't know what I did. I just stood there and didn't even breathe. I would like to think I smiled back. He was there for 2 beats, and then he was gone. Of course, I immediately told myself that I had imagined that, and then myself answered back, hell no, he was there. First ghost I've ever seen, and I'm too old to fool around. I don't have a habit of making this stuff up. I regret that I did not think to snap a picture on my phone of that chair, but I'm not a great picture taker and it doesn't come naturally to me. And of course, I was kind of stunned. Yeah, I would think you don't have enough wherewithal to be like, oh, maybe I should whip my camera out and get a picture of this.
Yeah, just a little stunned.
I didn't say anything, and we continued on through the house into the garden on the other side and the painter's studio he loved. I think I would have actually been like, oh my God, I just saw the ghost of Winston Churchill.
Yes, absolutely.
But I bet they were on a regular tour, so everybody probably would have looked at her like,
Are you on medication?
did you take your medication this morning? This is where his ghost has been seen mostly, in the studio, but it makes sense that he might also sit by his goldfish ponds. As I said, he painted them a great deal. Still water being one of the hardest things to master in painting, and he liked to sit there and meditate and look out over his valley. Churchill himself described a few encounters with ghosts. Once famously, he was staying in the Lincoln bedroom at the White House, I think during World War II, and he came out of the bathroom naked to find Lincoln standing with one elbow propped up on the mantel of the fireplace. Churchill bowed and said, "Mr. President, you find me at a disadvantage."
I remember going over that in one of the episodes.
Yeah, our haunted White House one, we talked about it. When he stood up, Lincoln was gone. He slept in another room that night. He already saw you naked. What does it matter? Another time, when he was in his painting studio after the war, he was copying a photo of his father, whom he worshipped, but who had neglected him badly, and who died when Winston was 20 or so, to make a painting of him. His father appeared as he worked, sitting in a chair nearby, and they discussed world events since his father had passed. Can you imagine being able to talk to your deceased loved one and have a conversation like that?
I think that's so neat.
He wrote a story about it called The Dream. I'm a bit ambiguous about whether this was something he felt really happened or just something he imagined happened. I have to go reread how he described it. I'm unsure. I believe his son Randolph, named after his emotionally distant and neglectful father, described a similar experience of talking with Winston after Winston had passed. Anyway, Chartwell is a delightful place, not creepy in the least. It's like stepping back into the 30s and 40s. There's still that out-of-time air about it. I recommend a visit highly. Winston might smile at you, too. And then she said she would append with her grandmother's story, so here this is. This was told to me at my grandmother's wake by my mother and aunt, who are very serious women not given to flights of fancy. My grandmother was a Rosie the Riveter. She wasn't really a riveter, but she worked at the Willow Run bomber plant outside Ypsilanti, Michigan during World War II. And wow, I would have never pronounced it the way that it's spelled.
But you've heard the name before, right?
I have.
Okay.
She ran the wires in the nose and wired the radios of the bombers. And what I told her is really cool about this is my grandmother was in the Marines and was a radio operator during World War II. So we kind of had a little bit of that in common. You've got this wiring the radios of the bombers. I think this story might have taken place in 1944 or so. My grandmother lived with her husband and 3 daughters in Pontiac, which was quite a drive from Willow Run. She traveled back and forth every day with a group of women who lived near her that also worked there. My grandmother didn't drive, but she did have access to my grandfather's car since he lived close enough to his work to walk. Another woman in the group was willing to drive. So the routine was that my grandparents would go around in the car and pick everyone up. Then they would drop my grandfather at work and drive off to Willow Run. They would reverse the process at night, picking up my grandfather so he could drive them all home before finally ending up at home with my grandmother in the car. Would have been easier if she'd learned to drive, but she never did. Anyway, one night the group of women were coming home from work and it was snowing quite hard. At the time, there was only a 2-lane road through deserted farm fields for most of the way from Willow Run to Pontiac. They followed a road, an old Indian road, only partly paved back then, called Pontiac Trail. Anyway, it kept snowing harder and harder, and they were all nervous. The road became harder and harder to see, and eventually they slid off the road into a ditch. Try as they might, they could not get the car out of the ditch. They were at their wits' end. There was no house in sight, nothing around them. Suddenly they heard a hello, and a young man, a serviceman, came walking up the road toward them. Now, at that time, it was not uncommon to see young servicemen home on leave hitchhiking on the roads, and people would stop and pick them up. It was generally considered safe then. So they greeted this young man and explained their problem. With the extra help he provided, they managed to get the car out of the ditch. He volunteered to drive because he too was headed home to Pontiac. They made it back to the city and picked up my grandfather, as was their custom. He drove them all around to their homes until it was just my grandfather, my grandmother, and the serviceman in the car. "Where can we take you?" my grandfather asked, and the serviceman said that the next corner would be fine. It was close to where he was going. They pulled over and he got out. My grandparents got out of the car to thank him, but he was gone. He was gone, and there were no footsteps in the snow on his side of the car. There were no prints anywhere except their own. They stood in the gently falling snow and looked up the quiet, dark streets and down them, but there was no one there. He had opened the car door and disappeared without a trace. They stood there a moment and then went home.
Wow.
Holy
So he was just
cow.
their little guardian angel. Helped them out of the
Totally.
ditch. Yep.
And I totally believe it because I believe I was helped by an angel too when I needed help pushing a vehicle. But wow.
Yeah, very cool.
It makes you wonder, was it an angel who just appeared as a soldier so that they would be comfortable with him?
Probably.
Or is it a soldier who passed away and just in the afterlife he's helping, these women who need help? What an amazing story.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Everything that Michelle shared, I'm like, holy crap. I've had a few paranormal things happen. We had maybe this demon that popped up in our apartment. And then this other time I saw Winston Churchill. Oh, and then there was that time that my grandmother had some angelic serviceman come help her. Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Michelle. And we want to thank the rest of you for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by our executive producers and maybe an angelic serviceman.
Make more the happy boy and share the podcast.
In the month of May on the 18th in 1897, Frank? It's Frank Capra. Frank Capra was born. He was an Italian-born American film director, producer, and screenwriter.
This is a screenwriter.
I'm having all kinds of problems today.
It's very owy, and our weather alarm went off. I shouldn't make fun, but because I do that with W's all the time myself personally.
When he was 25, Capra read a news article about a new movie studio.
Studio.
Thanks, Phil Collins. The name was later changed to Loclamond.
Getting fancy. Stick your pinky finger up.
Can I have a little tea with that?
Cattle were an important food source and could even be bled a bit without killing them to get blood to mix with oatmeal to make an early version of black pudding.
Black pudding. That already sounds completely disgusting. Blood mixed with oatmeal, but if you put in what do you mix it with your feet, Kelly? Black pudding.
To my surprise, there were numerous.
Oh,
my tongue got stuck.
It sounds like we've slowed down the audio.